in its most lucid terms, in perhaps the most simplest of terms possible, is an urge, a plea to each of you members to take an active interest in the affairs of your community, to take an active interest in your own traditions, and to make sure that you pass on the traditions that you have got, which is perhaps a fraction of what your parents had. At least that fraction must go to your children, at the very least. Does anybody in the audience know why do you burst crackers for Diwali? What is the connection? Any idea? Is it just a merry-making activity? Is it just a celebratory activity? Or is it just an activity for making money? Why do you burst crackers? What is the nexus? So here's the sequence. What comes before Diwali? You have the Shraddha period, the Mahalaya Paksh. Correct? Then you have Diwali. And then it comes the Kartika Masam. Correct? Here's the understanding. And you will find parallels to this structure or to this tradition even in China. So what are you doing during the Shraddha period or during the Mahalaya Paksh period? The understanding is that your ancestors have come and you're supposed to feed them. That is what effectively you do. They've come. Now they have to go back. They don't know the way. You light the sky for them to find their way back to heavens. There is scripture after scripture after scripture that says that this is to be done. It's called Akashadipam. We had to cite all of the scripture before the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court, in just 8 lines without discussing any evidence, had taken a position that bursting of firecrackers during Diwali is a mere celebratory activity. It's a merry-making activity. It is not a ritual. I'm sorry, it is a ritual. You can regulate it. You can limit it. When you burn sparklers, do you think there is a word for it in Sanskrit, or do you think that sparklers did not exist when Sanskrit existed? So the word for it is Ulkadana. You will find references to it in a scripture called Kartika Mahatmyam. And in multiple documents they have recorded this over and over and over again. Britishers have written, Indians have written, our scriptures say so, but we don't know. If somebody had approached the Supreme Court representing the rights of the Hindu community and other communities, there are any number of variants for Diwali. The Sikhs actually celebrate it as the Bandi Chhod Divas. That has a specific history. The Jains have a specific variant. Is it a coincidence that all these communities celebrate Diwali in one way or the other around the same period of time? Surely it's not coincidence. There must be something common to all of this. So considering all of this, what does it tell you? Your ignorance with respect to your own traditions is going to be used against you to humiliate you, to shame you, to call you a patriarch, to call you a chauvinist, to call you whatnot, until a point comes where you have decided to give up your identity altogether. Whatever is happening around you is not a struggle for resources, but it is a struggle for identity. Any number of people would say, but why is identity so important? Look at China, look at America. Then you have not understood their history. America believes in manifest destiny. It believes that it has a destiny to lord over the world, so to speak. That it has a destiny which facilitates pursuit of happiness. That is the identity they've imputed to themselves. China subscribes to the Middle Kingdom concept. What about India? What about India? We fail to realize the sheer privilege that we enjoy after generations of living in one unified territory from Himalayas to the south. This is something that even Chandragupta Maurya could not achieve, despite having a Chanakya by his side. This is something that Samudragupta could not achieve. This is something that even the Mughals could not achieve. As long as your identity exists, this entity exists in the way it exists. The day your identity is eviscerated and your identity is hijacked, India as it exists today, even as it exists today, despite all its flaws, will cease to exist. So Indic Renaissance is not the pastime of the upper middle class Hindu who has all the time in the world to sit and discuss dharma and karma, but this is at the end of the day a survival, existential campaign, a struggle. I went to Israel recently from October 13th to the 20th. And I've given this example before. Just give me a few minutes and I'll complete this. Think of the Israeli society as a society with concentric circles. At the core is the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. The next ring is the Orthodox Jewish community. Then comes the conservative Jew. Imagine ultra-Orthodox, Orthodox, and then you have the conservative Jew. And then you have the secular Jew. And on the outer fringe is perhaps the atheists. But the one thing that I was surprised and astounded by is the shared sense of Jewish heritage and pride in Jewish heritage that each of these people have, regardless of which ring they are in. Can you say the same thing about a secular Hindu and a conservative Hindu as far as India is concerned? You will not be in a position to say this, because he is so far removed and his level of guilt is so high that he'll perhaps be the first person to spit on his own roots compared to the outsider, so to speak, or someone who's outside the faith. The sum and substance of my agitation or my plea to you is simply this. Do not treat any of these talks as pastimes. I am not here to deliver a Harikatha. I am asking you to take ownership of at least one initiative, something that you believe in, and throw your weight behind it. If you're interested in reviving a certain art form, please see how is it that you can contribute to it. At the very least, take an interest in the temple which is in your locality and ask yourself who is running it. What is the level of state interference in it? Where does the money in the hundi go? Ask these questions. These are basic questions. This is doable. Not one suggestion that I've given is unreasonable. It doesn't require a stretch of your resources or imagination. It only requires you to put your money where your mouth is. So the next time you choose to whine about dharma, or you choose to whine about your religion, or you choose to whine about how the Indian state is hypocritical or is discriminatory towards Hindus, just ask yourself, have you taken at least one step? Have you contributed at least one brick to changing the status quo? If you have done nothing, I must say this bluntly, you do not have the right to whine. Under Article 19 or Article 14 or Article 21 or any of the free speech rights, while you have the freedom to speak and the freedom to express, we have unfortunately translated it to freedom to whine endlessly. This has become the nature of our society. So at the very least, and this is something that I have to say, I'm sorry, perhaps it's my young blood talking. I think of myself as being young. Pardon me if you don't think so. But the point is this. Anyone who seems to be a person of resources rushes to an ashram for salvation, God knows for what reason. I have to put this point. I have to say this. I'm sorry if I'm offending a lot of people. I'm simply paraphrasing what Vivekananda has said. You do not have a right to seek individual salvation when the rest of your society is struggling. You have not arrived at a phase where each of you can start going towards salvation. Go to any number of ashrams, patronize any number of babas, no problem, but come back to the temple. Because no matter which Baba comes and which Baba goes, the temple has to remain, it shall remain. It is your responsibility to ensure that it remains for eternity.